911, what is your emergency?
Units respond code 3 to a 1050 on the highway. Vehicles are blocking multiple
We're en route
lanes
to the
of travel.
hospital. Patient is currently having
We've got a
cardiac
4-alarm
arrest and has
fire
been
here.
intubated.
Send additional
Protesters are
trucks.
outside of City Hall and they are not complying with our
Out
orders
on 1.
to
Hold the
disperse.
air.
In a rapidly changing world for first responders where it seems that every day the rules and norms are changing, there is one voice you can count on to give you the latest in emergency news. That is Lifeline.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lifeline 911 Podcast with your host, Erica.
Hello.
I'm your co-host, Gary, and today we are joined by a special guest. Sarah Foster was a police dispatcher with the Austin Police Department from 2014 until 2016, wearing the headset, dispatching officers, and relaying radio traffic. After that, though, from 2016, she joined the police academy and then became a sworn officer for the Austin Police Department. We asked Sarah on to give her perspective on the difference of being behind the headset and in front of it. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
So, what kind of prompted you to want to make the change from being a dispatcher to going over into patrol?
Well, that's going to be a story.
Yes.
That's what we're here for.
Love stories.
So let's see. I graduated college in 2013. I went to college for a completely different career field, but midway through, that's when I decided I wanted to go into law enforcement. I was like, let me just finish my degree. I don't necessarily need a specific degree to go into law enforcement. But I would say, like, during those years, in my early 20s, late teens, I was pretty lost. I didn't know, like, who I was, didn't know what I wanted to do. And I kind of really just stumbled into law enforcement. Looking back in my youth, it was like all the signs were there that I would have enjoyed this career, but I was just so lost. Like, it just never dawned on me to get into law enforcement. And during those lost years, like, my dad had just died. I was going through a lot of family issues. And so I wasn't quite mentally prepared to go through an academy, let alone handle 911 calls, face to face, out on the field. And so I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do? And during one of my internships, I met, I interned with the U.S. Marshals, and during that stint, I was put with the Lone Star Fugitive Task Force, Intelligence Unit, Tactical Intelligence Unit, APD. It's such a long title, and I met some of those guys. So I rode out with them for a few weeks, and that's where I met my adopted dad, and I've adopted him as my dad, and he became my mentor. And he was like, yep, I agree, you're not quite ready for an academy, still very young, and still very lost. And so he was like, why don't you get into dispatching? And so I probably should have been a call taker first, because dispatching was really hard.
Yeah.
That was a pretty rough transition because my radio ear was terrible.
Wow.
Yeah, so I went into dispatching knowing that I was wanting to go to the sworn side. So yeah, that's kind of the brief story of how I got into dispatching and why.
That's amazing, because I never would have, because I know Gary in the introduction said that you worked with us, and when you got into dispatch, I think I was already back a year when you came through. Mm-hmm. And if anybody knows Sarah, she is, and I hope you take this the right way because we absolutely adore you. You do not look like any police officer I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
That's a good thing, because yeah. I make fun of you with Casey, who is a dear friend of yours and a colleague of Gary's and I's. And if anybody's ever seen Rizzoli and Isles, I always say that you are like Isles and Casey is Rizzoli. I mean, physical attributes, personality, demeanor, all of the things. And you just don't, you would not strike anyone as a police officer. And I don't say that in a bad way at all. It just, if you knew her, you would be like, huh, I would never have guessed that. So to hear your backstory is really intriguing to me.
Yeah, no, I get that a lot, and I still surprise people to this day. Even though I'm older in the face, I suppose, like I still get that. Especially because I'm also an introvert, as pretty much everybody knows me. And because I just don't fit the mold of
What?
military jarhead extrovert in your face. I'm
Not,
just
no.
gonna be a homebody with my dog.
And your what is it? Well, you have two other little fur babies. What is it?
Oh, they're hedgehogs.
That is amazing. That
Yeah.
is just amazing to me. But before we get too far off, because see, I tell Gary to go
Yeah,
because I will
yeah.
go off onto some other place. Gary, do you have a question before I take over completely?
Well, I was so, um, like, thank you for sharing that. I was unaware of that for your background and how you got into
Yeah.
dispatching. I think that's really awesome. And then I suppose as you did dispatching, you kind of found your way, and you're like, you know what, I really do like this, career field. I want to kind of move into a more, um, I guess, active or uh, out there kind of participant, and go into patrol.
Yeah, so I already knew that I wanted to be sworn. Um, at the time, though, I was actually looking and going federal, and which is still intriguing to this day, but not anymore. And I say that because when I was dispatching, um, I kind of found myself and I found my people. My family's very sparse. And so APD became a family, and I ended up adopting, like I said, a dad, and then I adopted like a sister, and then I adopted her
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
And I actually continue to adopt people from communications to be my best friends.
Nice.
And so I was like, oh, okay, and maybe I'll just do the academy here, and then I'll transfer to the feds in a couple years. Um, but it was like, I felt that, and it's probably cliche. I was like, I kind of found my family. And so it was hard for me to try and apply to different parts of the country, let alone to go federal. And then once I did become sworn, I never would have guessed it, but I loved the streets. I loved
Really.
patrol. Yes, I love patrol, and I still love it. Um, I love I love being a city cop. Um, I just really like local law enforcement, and so that's why I've stuck around. Almost regretting my promotion, but yeah, no, I ended up really liking patrol a lot.
So let me ask you if I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this question. I know that you always knew that you wanted to go into patrol while you were dispatching, but at what moment? Yeah, I guess that's what I would like to know. What was the moment, or was there a call, or was there a event in your life that said, "Okay, I'm ready. Let's let's apply and let's pull trigger." Was there something like that?
Um, no, so it wasn't a trigger. It was more of just the process. Um, While I was dispatching, I was working out like crazy, um, trying to get in shape. Um, going with my adopted dad to the boxing ring, going through rounds in the ring.
Wow.
I was in shape, and I think I applied a year and a half after dispatching and ended up having a pretty quick turnaround. but I was still, living my life and making my friends and not making much money. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. Um, and I just got my doggy, so there was still a lot of like life to be lived during that time. So it was more of a process of getting in shape. I also um, went to counseling for the issues I had been going on, which I had already talked about, which I hated, but it was necessary to do
Nice.
that and, to help get my mind straight. And so it wasn't necessarily a trigger, it was just kind of a process. And then the next round of applications opened up, and then I applied.
And how long did it take? Do you recall? Was it? I know you said it was a quick turnaround, but like when you say quick, because I know people that have gone from communications over to the academy, and it's been 8 months, 6 months. I mean, and then some have just. It was like they applied, they get all their stuff done, and in a couple of months they're in. It's the craziest thing.
Yeah, mine took a month. And
Wow.
yeah, my application was accepted, and then the next thing I knew, my oral board and physical fitness tests were being scheduled within the month, which thank goodness I was prepared and ready.
Yeah.
I thought that was going to be at least a year because, I mean, more than 10 years ago, it would take people up to 2 years to get into the Austin Police Academy. But I guess I hit that window at the right time. So within a month, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So if you had to talk to someone and they were trying to decide should they go straight into the academy or should they go your route, like the same route, even if they like say they didn't have any of the work, the amazing and hard work that you had to do to get mentally and emotionally ready. If they didn't have that, would you advise them to go the route you went, or say, you know what, don't even worry about going through communications first, just bite the bullet and go?
Oh no, I would, and I would, and I have told people to actually go the communications route. Um, I think it's very important when you get into this type of career field. It's a career for most people. It's not a 2 year stint,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a very taxing career on so many different levels. And so I definitely advise people don't rush it,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're young, because I'm like, you may not be able to retire, you know. Um,
So, do you find
as
that having worked in communications, like that gave you some like additional advantage or skill sets in terms of what you ended up using out on patrol when once you became sworn, like how to deal with angry callers translated to dealing with them better in public face to face, or kind of keeping track of all the things that you had to as a dispatcher helped you kind of be more aware, keep your head on a swivel while you're out there,
Mm-hmm.
anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, the radio era was my biggest struggle starting in dispatch. And then as a rookie, I didn't have to go through that struggle period.
Nice.
And so that
Oh,
really helped. And staying within the same agency helped as well because then I already knew the 10 codes, the radio talk. And I knew who my dispatchers were. And so there was that camaraderie already in place. And
Nice.
then, if I messed up a little bit, I could call up communications and be like, can you fix this for me? Which was quite frequent. Um, and I also could, you have that radio, but then who your dispatchers are. And so it was easy for me to understand dispatch, understand my colleagues, um, and then, yeah, communicating with the public wasn't such a shock because I was already having to do that. Um, and being a dispatcher at Austin wasn't a call taker, so I wasn't necessarily talking to the public as much, but more with officers, and you're
Mm.
dealing with all sorts of tones and personalities and stresses and camaraderie. But I still had to make the phone calls, and it's, yeah, it definitely helped staying within the same agency, and it would have helped going to a different agency as well.
So when you say you had the camaraderie, you do something. Well, actually, let me back up. Which is, I don't know if you're the only one, but I think maybe Gary, you can say there might be only one other person who has gone from communications out into the field, done patrol for a significant amount of time, and still comes back to work with us.
Yeah, I think there's just two.
Yeah, just the two. So, do you, because we have so many that through the years that I've been with APD that have gone out, and I'm sure any other person listening that works for a different agency will probably, silently be nodding their head yes to this. Officers go out and they don't look back. What makes you look back?
Well, because you guys were my family. You know,
Nice.
you guys were my family, and it's not like I didn't like dispatching. I still enjoy it. Um, and I know we're probably going to talk about sworn and civilians and the disconnect. And there's disconnections all over law enforcement. Um, but I do see that there's such a teamwork involved in law enforcement, and there are so many components to the career that most people don't see. So when people are listening to their podcasts and they're watching the documentaries, they tend to only focus on either the detective working the case or the initial officers. And having been on both sides, there are so many entities in play, everywhere from communications to people helping file the warrants to the counselors. There's just so many people at play trying to make this career, not this career, but this field just possible. There's
Yeah.
just so many working components.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I don't think that there's a show out there that has successfully showed that that line, or maybe the connection, or the stages from the beginning of the call all the way to the end. And I guess even as I'm saying that, maybe that's not necessarily true because we do have the 911s, but I don't think it's quite the same. That it doesn't show how many layers there are to this profession. And you mentioned that disconnect. How, how do you see that disconnect if you had to describe it to someone who is not Gary or I? How would you describe that disconnect, and what advice would you have to maybe fix it or try to bridge it somehow?
I think the disconnect is we get so wrapped up in our own job title, and we're also busy in our own ways that we tend to forget that there's a lot of people looking at maybe the case that you're working from start to finish. um, and like you said, like layers is a good thing, I think a good way to describe it. But we get so wrapped up in, especially as a patrol officer, and then you have so many things that you're thinking about, um, that you kind of forget that that person on the other line of the radio, man, they have your back, and you kind of take that for granted over time because they're always there.
Yeah.
That radio is manned 24/7. Even when you get to end your shift, that radio is still going. And we gotta take those 911 calls over and over and over and over. And where's the time to go meet your dispatcher, call taker? There just isn't much time. And then you just kind of get used to it and then eventually take for granted that there are people out there and it is a team. To bridge that gap, man, I don't have enough stars. I don't actually have any stars, but I don't have any bars or anything like that, which I can't say I really have spent the critical thinking to try and bridge that gap, but I think write outs are very important.
Yeah.
Definitely taking the time as a rookie officer and then maybe as a senior officer, just, hey, go back and listen to the radio and how you can develop that relationship. It's definitely needed. It's just so hard to do when our careers are just 24/7 and they just don't stop and people need you.
You're right.
And you feel, you feel like maybe you can't take the time to do something outside of your job title specifically because someone's relying on you, either your partner to make a backup or someone just called 911 and it's your job to handle it.
I think that is so well said because even though I know every part of what you're saying is true, I don't know how many times I, as a communications employee, have said these officers need to come in here and see what it is we do. They need to spend X, minutes, hours, whatever. And it just did not until really right now register to me that you just may not have time to stop, to press pause on what is your essential job duty to come find out what my essential job duty is. I think that, like you said, officers sometimes take for granted what happens on our side of the radio. I think we sometimes take for granted that you just don't have time to stop and come spend what it would take, an hour or two, to even begin to scratch the surface of understanding what it is that we do.
Yeah, and honestly, like, for me, it's easy to go and visit and be like, sorry that vehicle pursuit or foot pursuit, I didn't do such a great job on that. And sorry, I made you spill your coffee as I immediately started yelling, I'm in a pursuit. So for me, I know what your screens look like and I know what you're doing multitasking. But even, if a patrol officer went up there and spent 2 hours, I don't know how much comprehension there would be
Right.
because
You're right.
there's so much training and there's color codes and there's short codes and power lines and there's only so much you can comprehend in that, but it's still needed. But
Yeah.
without having done the job, it's still so hard to fully comprehend what all is being done.
I think that's absolutely fair. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of ask you, since you kind of, I don't know if fortunate is the right word, but you kind of have a unique perspective, since you're the first, I think, active sworn person we've had on the program. So you started, you hit the streets in 2016, 2017, and you got to kind of witness, like, because back then I think the department had a very positive relationship with the community, and then we had a pretty negative time in the early part of the 2020s, and I think it's kind of coming back to be more positive now. So there have been a couple of times in history where police have been very disliked by the public. You had like the early 90s, the 70s, pretty much. So how was that for you? Because that's like you were actually out physically with people that are like, I'm going to spit on you and maybe say some colorful language that's not very friendly. How was that?
It definitely wasn't a highlight of my career.
I bet.
There's definitely a lot of conversations that needed to be said or were said, and it definitely prompted a lot of change, created a lot of change. Um, for me personally, I never thought about quitting the career field. It seemed like everyone around me was, but I was like, I don't know what else I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
And I still had goals in mind, and I knew that, you know, people still need the police. They still need us. People, whether that needs to look differently or better practices to be done and improve. We can always improve on everything. That's just kind of how life is.
True.
Um, but for me, like, it wasn't like quitting was an option. I just like, I don't know what else I'm gonna do, and I still really enjoyed the career field, and I still do. Um, but I would say I lost some friends during that just because of my job title.
Really?
Yes, I did. Um,
Oh, wow.
I've had issues with family members, and I wouldn't say it would stem from recent events. It's definitely hard being an individual as a patrol officer during that time. I couldn't say about a detective and onward up in the ranks, but being a patrol officer, you're kind of the face, and um, yeah, so I definitely lost some friends. I definitely had
Wow.
to disconnect from social media. Um, just too many opinions out there without anyone ever having done a write out or
Hmm.
being connected to the career field. But the job itself, it's changed so much. Um, some good
Yeah.
things and maybe some things that I wish was still around. Like, I think there's a lot of skills that have been lost, a lot of experience and wisdom in law enforcement that has been lost due to people leaving, resigning, the units being
Disbanded.
disbanded.
Yeah.
Yes. It was really hard for me to see the DWI unit go away. I loved getting drunk drivers off the street, and I, seeing someone be hit by a drunk driver or killed, witnessing it in person, it's like, man, this was just preventable. And
Yeah.
seeing that unit being taken away, that was hard. Like, I can't believe that's one of the units to go away. And then you start seeing more and more units, and then you kind of see on the streets that a lot of your colleagues are all very young, and there's not much wisdom there for you to learn from.
Yeah.
And it's been different.
Wow. I'm still stuck on the loss of the friendships, but I guess it shouldn't shock me though, because I think Gary and I have had episodes and we kind of touch on it from time to time, how this is a culture, and it is in a lot of ways it is exclusive versus inclusive, because there's a whole other language, there's a mindset, there's an attitude, there's a, a way of thinking, right? We have to conduct ourselves in ways that the average Joe does not. Everything that we do a lot of times is on display, and I can't imagine what that must be like for you. Because you have to pick your friends, you have to decide whether or not it's how do you let go of people, and there's only so much you can explain to them about why your job is what it is. Am I making any sense at all? Does that
It
sound
does
right?
make sense. It does make sense. It is a very exclusive career field. It's a very lonely career field because
Yeah.
you do have to choose your friends and maybe even some of your family members. Um, you
Yeah.
you definitely have to have the boundaries, and
Hmm.
you know having to explain that to people has been difficult. Um, and then going forward in the career and meeting new people, and like you said, people don't. I never tell people, I'm in law enforcement, and when they find out, like, like you said, like, they're kind of shocked.
In a good way.
Yeah. Um, but then you kind of get this lens, and I know that communications has the same thing. You have this lens, you know, about society, and it can be pretty dark. and a thick lens, and
Hmm.
you just see so many terrible things. You see the worst of society,
Yeah.
and sometimes carrying on with your day at the grocery store, it can even be overwhelming because you're just surrounded by people who just don't know and take for granted their not easy life, but maybe not as dark of a life as they think it is.
I always say I like to say it because we have, like say Sixth Street, for instance. We always, in communications, talk about how we don't go to Sixth Street at certain times of the year or day or night or whatever. Because why? Because we know too much, and the average person does not know what they do not know, and we see activities like people jogging at 5 a.m. in certain areas of town, and we're like, are you crazy? Why? Because they don't know what they don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
I can see that, and that's just at my level, being communications, because we're safely tucked away in a building that can withstand tornadoes and such. You guys are out there exposed to anything and everything. Gary, don't look like that. You should
Supposedly,
see
you
his
know.
face right now. I believe it with all of my heart that
Okay.
if an F3, 4 came through there, we are safe. Thank you, Gary.
Yep.
But see, you made me forget what I was saying. What was I saying?
We're kind of shielded from a lot of that, that they see out in the field.
Yeah, and and we are shielded somewhat from the negative. I don't know, way of people the way people see law enforcement. We don't get as much of that negativity, I don't think. Or would you guys agree? Being in communications versus having the uniform.
Uh,
Oh, sorry. No,
uh,
I was meant to tell you before. My dogs are probably gonna bark
No,
at
it's
some point.
fine.
I would agree to some extent. Um, in communications, yeah, you have to be just as professional on the phone,
Hmm.
but there is a time where you can just politely disconnect.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, with patrol officers, you just can't quite disconnect. And sometimes you have to just, you got to go hands on with it. And yeah, it's a little more intense. And I would say it's probably increased over the years. And then when you see, a 5-year-old child already, throwing the middle finger at you and saying FTP, and you're like, what?
What is
What is
happening?
happening? Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
you're not even 3 feet tall. What do you mean?
what are you doing? But then it's sad at the same time because I'm like, oh my gosh, if this child needs help, do they know to call 911, and do they know that, we're here to help them? And that terrifies me at the same time.
Agreed. Agreed. You were
one
going
of
to
the
say
things
something,
we,
Gary?
yeah, one of the things we kind of touched on in another episode was when you come home, you uh, take off your metaphorical uniform and kind of like leave those work issues at the door and don't let that affect your personal life. And um, for absolutely even more so for you guys out there in the field, the police, fire, and EMS personnel that are like actively going into the field. That has to be doubly true for getting out of that work mindset and
Hmm.
getting into a I'm with family and friends kind of mindset.
Hmm. I've been pretty fortunate to have that switch where I can easily turn it on and turn it off, and it is usually triggered by my patrol shirt or my uniform shirt. Um, I kind of knew that early on that was going to do that and needed to do that. But I think for all of us, it builds up. Regardless how much we think we can turn it off, it still builds up. And it can definitely get to you. And that's where, you start seeing people being disgruntled in the career field, and there's that 4-year, 5-year low that pretty much everyone goes through. But yeah, it's still there, but that switch is very important.
Okay, so I know I said this to you, Foster, before we even got on, that I did want to talk a little bit about um, a passion of yours that is still connected to your law enforcement career, and that's animals. How you actually found a way to help our little furry friends while you still do the thing that you do in your everyday law enforcement duties. How would you describe that to us? Because you go a little extra with it
Yeah,
in a good way.
extra is definitely the word. Um, so the lull that I was talking about, and I don't know the verbiage that was used in the academy, but it's basically explained to all cadets. You're gonna love your job at first on patrol, and then you're gonna hit your lull, and you'll be really disgruntled. You're gonna feel angry. You're gonna feel frustrated, and it usually hits people at 4 to 5 years, and it takes a while to get out of that. I probably hit that 3 times.
Well, okay.
In the 8 years that I was on patrol, I definitely hit that, yeah, 3 times. I distinctly remember. Um, and the third time, I was like, okay, what am I gonna do? Because I wanted to go to specialized units and they were pretty much gone.
Hmm.
And so I was really upset about that. I wasn't really planning on promoting. And, I was also in that mindset where I wanted to do everything and be everything, and I want to be perfect at everything. And I'm like, and as I got in the career and older, I was like, okay, well, that's just not possible. And that's
Yeah.
just not me. And I'm not having fun anymore.
Hmm.
And that's when I decided to do what I enjoy and do what I love, and kind of focus on my favorite things that were in my control. And that's kind of the hardest thing that we have in this profession, is in our control.
Hmm.
And that's when I kind of fell into being obsessed with animal calls. So I got a little possessive at some point. I took all the animal calls, and um, it was pretty intense to the point where um, I knew all the homeless dogs' names in my sector.
I'm sorry. Wait,
That's impressive.
what? That's
Yeah.
awesome. That is awesome.
And so it would be routine for me to visit my furry friends weekly. Um, check in on them, check in on whether they had food, and then I just kind of wanted to know the dog's stories. And then I started seeing a different then I started seeing a very dark side of society in terms of how
Hmm.
we handle our animals, our homeless animals. And then my passion grew even more. And then I definitely became possessive of the calls, to a point where I would kick off my shift mates. If they tried to take an animal call, I'm like, nope, this is mine. I would even message dispatch, like, take them off. It's mine. I just haven't assigned yet. Um, and
That's
yeah, it
awesome.
got to a point where like detectives would send out bolos, and I would be able to recognize the dog and identify the suspect.
Wow.
It's
That's
impressive.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So it was a different side of policing, and I'm like, okay, I may not be the best at like finding dope. It wasn't really my thing anyways. So, but I found this niche where, like, okay, I can connect to my community if I talk about their dog or their pets,
Hmm.
and that's how I
Hmm.
gained a lot of rapport with people.
It's really
Yep.
Um,
smart.
and being an introvert, I was like, what am I going to talk about?
That just still
But
blows my mind. Still absolutely blows my mind because I've spent time with you in comms and I just don't see it. But okay.
yeah, and that's how I connected with my community. Because I was in three sectors, and by the time I got to my third sector, I didn't have that strong of a connection with my community, compared
Mhm.
to when I first started. But then I built it back up by using their animals or dogs as rapport. And it even got to a point where, like, these people would see that I loved their animals. I would say hi to the animals, give them food, and they would tell me the latest thing that was going on the streets, and they would identify people for me, or I would say a street name and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's this person and they live here." And I'm like, "Cool, I'm gonna go serve that warrant."
Nice.
And so
Nice.
there was more to it than just petting a dog. I
Yeah.
found a different way of policing where I could enjoy it. Um, and so that led into kind of realizing that even though Austin loves their animals, we don't take animal abuse as serious as I think it should be. And of course, I'm biased in that.
Hmm.
Um, I I think there is a lack in handling animal calls. There's a lack of training, a lack of knowledge. I recently promoted, and there was a lot of feelings involved with that because, like I said, I loved patrol. But then I realized I'm not going to be able to take all my animal calls. I'm not going to be able to respond to them. So what am I going to do? I it brings me so much joy to follow animals through their journey, which I have a story in itself if y'all have time. Um,
Shoot.
and so I messaged the detectives in animal cruelty and I was like, okay, I think we can do something more and I'm really going to miss my animals. So can we start an auxiliary unit? Because we don't have our specialized units anymore. What's been happening within departments where the detectives and people just with their passions are creating these auxiliary units, such as the DWI unit, and these patrol officers are still able to get their niche. Oh no, there goes Bruce. Still able to get their niche while being on patrol,
Hmm.
and that's when the detectives and I collaborated with another shiftmate, and we started the animal cruelty auxiliary unit. And so we have monthly trainings, and it's not only to bring more training and awareness around animal cruelty and how to write better reports, how to detect it, but also know our case law with animal cruelty because that is lacking. Like, I couldn't tell you much case law out there right now, but I'm hoping to improve that.
Nice.
And but also bring morale back to the department because I mean, who doesn't want to improve the life of a furry animal? And a lot of us get into law enforcement because we want to protect the ones that can't protect themselves,
Hmm.
which is in particular children, disabled, elderly, but that
Yeah.
also includes our animals. They can't call 911 and they
Right.
can't really give a statement.
Right.
And
True.
so I just I just want to continue on with my career with still strengthening the knowledge around it and hopefully be more involved and get others involved and not so much be completely obsessed about it and getting to know all the names dogs in their sectors, but showing people like, well, there's different ways of looking at your patrol job,
Yeah.
um, and using animals was one perspective, and then if you guys have time, I do have a story to kind of show how how much I have followed some of the animals in my sector.
Absolutely. Go for it. I'm intrigued. Go.
Where's my popcorn?
Yeah. No, seriously. I'm ready.
Okay, so I would say, especially around the holidays, what ends up happening is a lot of people will get their puppies, and you'll see in February, January, February, you'll see a huge influx of puppies on the streets. And the most common thing is that people don't drive out to the countryside and abandon their dogs, which is illegal. People don't realize that's a crime, but it's a crime. If they don't go to the countryside and abandon their dogs, then they'll go up to the intersections and they'll just let the dog out and tell the homeless person, hey, the dog's yours. And so that's how a lot of the homeless people have a dog.
Oh,
And of course those, you know, okay, edit that out. So that's I was about to say something, but don't include that. Okay. So that's how a lot of the homeless people have their dogs, is by people abandoning them. And that's usually why they're puppies, or they're post the cute puppy phase and they may be about 5, 6 months old. And so there's this gentleman and he had a dog, and he was, we'll just say, active in the community. He was just always out and about, and so I knew him. And one day he flags me down and he says, "Hey, someone stole my dog," which is also common. And he loved this dog, and her name was Daisy. And I would always see Daisy at the gas stations and pet her and stuff. But someone stole his dog, and next thing I knew, he had a new dog, and that's essentially what had happened. Her name was Barbie. She was given to some kids for Christmas. They no longer wanted her, and so they dropped her off. And this gentleman ended up keeping Barbie. And of course, I kind of promoted taking her to go get her shots. And there's definitely a lot of free clinics and some food that he can get for her. Well, then Barbie became pregnant.
okay.
And so he didn't get her spayed, and she got pregnant with puppies. And it was right after Valentine's Day, and I was about to go on vacation, but I was like, let me go stop by and see how Barbie's doing. And there she is in a tent, and she's giving birth. And so I saw 11 pitties being birthed, and then of course I kept track of them. And this gentleman was able to secure an apartment through the city, and so I would go visit him and the puppies and bring them supplies. And there's some sad stories woven in between the puppies' lives and Barbie, but I will say this gentleman was like, you get to have the pick of the litter, you get to have any puppy you want. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I gonna one, I can't say no, but two, like, I can't just take a puppy home. You know me, like, it just wasn't really like, it'd be like, oh my god, here we go again.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do with this puppy? Because I didn't want the puppy to go back out on the streets. And it was a pit bull, of course, and
Yes.
little pity baby. So one of my colleagues ended up adopting him. And so his name is Shiner. And so my colleague has Shiner now. And so I'm the godparent.
Oh my
And
god.
he's my paw son.
Wow.
But the story continues because there were some issues going on inside the apartment with the gentleman that owned him. And I won't go into his business too much, but he ended up getting rid of Barbie. And I'm not sure what happened, but there was another boy. Well, I find out that this other dog, he was hit by a car, and I was contacted about it, and he had a broken leg, some other injuries, and then I'm like, okay, well, what's going to happen to this dog now? And I felt like he was kind of mine. Well, now that colleague also adopted him, so he ended up
Wow.
adopting two brothers, and so now I have two paw sons.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't crack. That just cracks me up. I love it. I
Yeah,
love
that's
it.
how invested I get into some of these animals and their stories. And, you know, again, our lives are so exclusive and we see the darkest of society. And I have learned so much following these animals, in particular this litter and this mom dog, their story. And I've seen that there's again that disconnect and we can do better.
Yeah.
And which really helped me get out of that lull of law enforcement where I was just disgruntled, and it just kind of brought joy back into the career. Um, but yeah, that's my passion.
Definitely. And just, well, for those of you listening, Foster has brought at least one fur baby into the comm center for us to, I think somebody adopted one of them too, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that little doggy, I wouldn't say I got in trouble for this one, but
Uh-oh.
I was en route to a call where there was some fraud going on and the suspect was going back and forth. And so we were all tied up on this crash and we were trying to break away to get to the suspect. And this animal urgent call came out, and I'm like, oh no, oh no. And it was basically this guy was actively drowning a puppy.
That's right.
And yes, and oh my God, all my shift mates were like, we got this. We know you have to go. Just take care of it and handle it. And that's it's exactly what the call text stated. This guy was intoxicated on narcotics, and the when I got there, the puppy wasn't in the puddle of water, but he was soaking wet. And he had stolen the puppy.
What?
Yeah, he had stolen the puppy, and so I was able to basically be like, this puppy's not yours. I'm gonna have to take the puppy, and the rightful owner can check in with the shelter to try and claim the puppy. But nobody did, and as I have the puppy in my car, that's when I take a detour to communications, and I'm like, this puppy's too cute,
Yes, I remember.
and yes, and then brought him to communications, and then I felt obligated to get him a better home, a better situation if his
Yeah.
family didn't come to get him. And then, yep, a dispatcher has him right now, and his name is Astro, and he's in doggy daycare, and he loves it, and he's just a cutie
That's
patootie.
amazing. Doggy daycare. Wow,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
he has all the friends in doggy daycare, and he's doing really well, and I'm proud of him.
That is awesome.
Well,
Go,
we are
Gary.
very proud of you as well, Sarah, and we really appreciate you coming on to kind of share your story and the struggles and the ways that you've kind of overcome that lull by investing your time in things that you're passionate about, like helping dogs to their doggy daycares. And if you're not
Yeah.
aware of it, if you're not aware of it, there's a TV show called Paw Patrol that you might like. I'm just putting that out there for you.
Oh, I'm very
Wow.
aware. This the animal auxiliary unit, the nickname is Claw and Order.
Yes.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
There's a lot of nicknames for it, but the main one right now is Claw and Order. And
That's awesome.
you know, it's not the most tactical passion of mine in law enforcement, but I completely own it.
Good. Somebody needs to have, someone needs to be an advocate for our puppies. And, there's the Humane Society and they do all those things, but somebody with a badge needs to go out and fight for them. I got your back, Sarah. I got it.
Well,
I know you do.
thank you so much for joining us, Sarah, and sharing that story. And thank you all for joining us as well. We appreciate you tuning in and listening. And if you have any questions or you want us to talk about anything, feel free to email us at lifeline911podcast@gmail.com. From all of us at Lifeline 911 Podcast, I'm Gary.
I'm Erica.
And we will see you next week.
Thank you for watching our production of Lifeline 911 podcast. If you have any questions about the topics we discussed today, or if there's something specific you'd like us to cover in a future episode, send us your questions at lifeline911podcast@gmail.com. Stay safe out there. Until next time, this is Lifeline 911 signing off.